streets that I walk on now have been inhabited for the last 5,000 years. Behind me are the ruins of a city that was settled in around 3000 BCE. My name is Milo Rossi, and today we are here standing in front of the ruins of Haran.
Like much of southeastern Turkey, the current city of Harran sits in the Fertile Crescent, the stretch of land that we all know from our history books as being situated between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and being the birthplace for civilization. Because of this, the lands surrounding Haran has seen habitation for at least the past 12,000 years, and we know that by around 6,500 BCE, the first human settlements had begun to arise in the area surrounding what would one day become Haran.
When Haran was originally founded, it was a trade colony where Mesopotamian merchants from the city-state of would have been traveling this way on their path north. Now, during the early days of Mesopotamian rule, this city was a hub of worship for the moon god Sin, or Nana in Akkadian. And these early days of the city actually find it as one of the most important sites in early biblical history. Stories state that the prophet Abraham actually stayed in this city at one time, and that's just the beginning, with not only Abraham staying here, but also Jacob having stayed here one night. And as the story goes, this is actually the location where Jacob had his dream about Jacob's ladder. Exactly where that is here, we're not entirely sure.
You know the story of Jacob's ladder? Of a ladder going into the heavens, and with angels descending and ascending in that ladder. And so that was the first story in the Bible where God sends a message to someone through a dream and declares a place to be holy. So in the Bible, this is the first place to be declared holy. So it's the first holy site.
It is pretty amazing to be walking around here because there is this whole section that's restored in the back, but as I just sort of walk through these fields, you're walking over foundations. There's boulders and stones that are from 5,000 years of human habitation, all littered around your feet. The trails are not really, paved roads, but layers of pottery and carved stones that have been deposited here over the 1,000 years that humans have lived here. Look at that. There's cows in it now. Isn't that amazing?
Probably cows in it then.
Yeah, there's cows in it then, there's cows in it now. Some things never change. No, by about the 8th century BCE, the city had changed hands into the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians were sort of the first people to change this from a place that was more faith-focused to a more administrative position. However, despite the Assyrians converting this to a major administrative center, it still retained a lot of its religious significance, with a large proportion of its purpose still being dedicated to the worship of the moon god. And the astronomical significance of this site only continued. The Assyrians actually built an observatory here, as if you kind of look around a little bit, if you want to do a little pan, you can see that we are on this very flat plain, and Haran is a small outlying, outcrop of raised land in an otherwise completely flat environment. Not only this, but the people of Haran would have lived in a world before electricity where there would have been no light pollution, and so the observation of the heavens from this site would have just been astronomical. What's probably the most amazing about the Assyrian rule in this city is that it was actually the final stronghold of their empire, and it was here that the Babylonians finally brought an end to the Assyrian Empire.
By about 640 BCE, the Assyrian Empire had begun to collapse, and by about 615 BCE, they had lost their capital city of Assur. In an attempt to preserve their crumbling empire, the Assyrians moved their administrative center to what is now the city of Haran, a small holdout which eventually became the only remaining city of what was once the Great Assyrian Empire. By 610 BCE, the city of Haran had come under siege by the Babylonians, and by 609 BCE, all Assyrian records and writings disappear from our history books, signifying that it was on these very grounds that the Assyrian Empire was finally wiped off the map. What is interesting is that there is an old Assyrian story taking place in the city of Haran. Our first records of it are from about 670 BCE, nearly 100 years before the conquest and ultimate defeat of the empire. But the story goes that in the city of Haran was a woman who had become possessed by a god, and in her possession she would tell stories of the impending collapse of the empire, and how eventually it wouldn't be long before they would meet their final end. Whether or not this story is true, we will never know, but to those who lived through the collapse of the Assyrian Empire, this very well could have seemed like a grim prophecy that turned out to be true.
I'm trying to, like, you know, find a good place to stand, and it's kind of unusual to just have all of these giant ancient stones lying around. I'm so used to, you know, American archaeological sites where they find like a needle and you like can't go within like 40 miles of it. But here there's just so much, and it's all so old that it's like, I mean, it's just all around your feet. You could just kind of walk over it. Oh, hey, come look at this one. This is kind of interesting. It's a little tiny sink, water fountain maybe. Huh, amazing. Haran has changed hands many times due to its location between so many different large empires. After the Babylonians, it enjoyed a brief period of independence before being conquered by the Persians, and after which being conquered by Alexander the Great. And as you won't be surprised to know, due to its location, it wasn't long before the Romans decided to try and get a little piece of it as well. At the time of Roman conquest, the city was called Carrhae, which had carried over from the Greek name. And it was here in 53 BCE that Haran would have become the center of a massive battle between the Romans and the Parthians. However, it ended in a catastrophic Roman defeat, with the general being captured and brutally executed by having molten gold poured down his throat, which doesn't sound like all that great of a way to go, if I'm being totally honest. Despite this crippling loss, the Romans were relentless and eventually did manage to capture the city. But what's so amazing about this city is that no matter how many times it changed hands, it maintained a status as being an educational center. When the Islamic Golden Age took control here as well, it retained the same educational value that it always had. In fact, right behind these gables that we see here was a university, one of the first in the world.
The old Haran University was active from around the 8th century to the 13th century, and was, at the time, one of the most prestigious educations of higher learning in the entire world. It was founded in 717 AD, and was a hallmark of the higher education and learning that came out of the Islamic Golden Age. And some actually recognize this as being the world's very first university. At its peak between the 8th and 9th century, the university would have seen the presence of nearly 9,000 students who would have been at the forefront of learning everything from mathematics to philosophy to astronomy to medicine, with a great emphasis on document translation, working in languages such as Greek, Arabic, and Syriac. This liberal environment of higher education made the Haran University one of the most prestigious institutions in the world for hundreds of years.
However, science can only thrive in a place where it's accepted, and so as the city continued to change hands and more radical ideas were accepted in this area, the science had to move to a place where people would listen. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire would have taken control of this city, and they would maintain control of it up until the First World War, after which the modern country of Turkey would have been founded and would have seen the final decline of the city of Haran. Today, the city still expands far beyond the borders of its ancient walls, but the ancient city center, which was once surrounded by a huge fortification, remains in ruin. If you look around us here, you can see the foundations of homes that would have been occupied for around 5,000 years up until only the last 100 or so. It's pretty amazing to be walking through this and thinking of just how much human history is below my feet. This is a place that has been occupied pretty much continuously for, you know, as long as every story of every empire that you've ever heard. And to realize that each one of these stones is not just a random outcropping or a, you know, piece of debris left over from a landslide, but something that was intentionally placed here and was once the part of a dwelling, a shop, or a university. The excavations at Haran are ongoing, and there are several active sites actually on the other side of the tower back there. The tower, which was once part of a mosque, of which you can see the gables still standing. What's so interesting about this tower actually is it has more significance than just an archaeological site, with many people speculating that it's actually this structure that inspired the image on the tower tarot card, a card which symbolizes destruction and rebirth, something that you can actually see symbolized at the tower that stands behind me with its ancient and historic base and several instances of repair and rebuilding on the top. And this theme of destruction goes far beyond just the tower. As we walk through these ruins, it's clear to see just how many times this city has shifted hands, and while it has been the site of countless eras of learning, it has also been the site of ceaseless bloodshed. And so as we stand on this place, it's important to remember that it's not just an archaeological site, it's not just a pile of ancient rocks, but it's the story of humanity. It's a story of people who have lived here here for longer than we can possibly imagine. It's hard to try and put into words. I'm trying to think of a way to really be able to articulate what it feels like to stand here, or to be able to convey the feeling and the, I guess, energy that this place has. And I just can't. It's the kind of thing where you stand here and you look at this and you're lost for words, because you're just such a small speck in this endless timeline of people being here. And I know that my footprints here will quickly, blow away and be replaced by someone's thousands of years from now. And the story of this place is one which is really never going to end. Now, as you can see here, Haran is still an active city. The ancient part of it may be abandoned and buried, but human habitation has never really ended here. Even at the end of the Ottoman Empire, when it was converted into the modern country of Turkey, the population drastically declined here, but never fully disappeared. So what you're looking at here is sort of this interesting, I guess, touch point between the ancient city to my right and sort of the modern city to my left. And you can actually see the amount of time that people have lived here, because a lot of the traditional structures that were built in this area are still used, and there's no form of these that are more iconic than the beehive houses.
The beehive houses of Haran are a unique and incredibly bizarre feature. Homes like these are found literally nowhere else in the world, with the only examples of them existing in the city of Haran. They have been given the modern name of beehive houses as they resemble a skep or an upturned basket beehive, and they are constructed out of either mud or clay bricks as well as straw. Their circular design is ingenious for this environment. Haran is set in a hot, harsh environment, and the construction of the beehive houses actually helps to keep them very cool. Along with this, their construction materials are cheap, and the expansion on a dwelling like this is very easy, since all one would need to do to expand this home and make it larger is just build another beehive next to it and then punch a doorway through. You end up with sort of a honeycomb network of these dome-shaped houses. What's even more interesting is that this tradition of beehive houses, which is found nowhere else in the world, is one of the oldest traditions in Haran. Records of the city from nearly 3,000 years ago show evidence of these circular dwellings, meaning that no matter how many times the settlement has changed hands, the persistent memory of building homes in this way has existed here and outlived entire empires.
What's so amazing about walking through this place is that the story is still being written. We may walk through it now and be like, well, this is it. It's an archaeological site and it has a town around it, and that's kind of the extent of it. But at the major cultural points in history that I've been talking about, the people didn't know that they were living through, massive change, and they didn't know they were leaving things behind that were going to be excavated, hundreds if not thousands of years from now. So it's kind of interesting to think that we sit at the end of the timeline, when in reality, we're just at the most recent point. Thousands of years from now, we have no idea what's going to be here, and these homes are just the most recent installation in a thousands of years story. The story of Haran is one that cannot be shoehorned into a single video. It has so many stages and so many eras that its story is practically untellable, and trying to give a chronology of it in a brief period of time is an immense challenge. But even though it lies in ruins around me, the story of Haran is far from over. It is still completely buried, with only the tops of the walls sticking out above the soil. And so for those of you who are curious enough to want to know more about this site, I can almost guarantee you that within your lifetime there will be countless more stories that will be unearthed from the ground that sits directly below my feet. And to add to this scale, the story of Haran is just the story of one out of countless places in the Fertile Crescent, as it's called. The stretch of land between the Tigris and Euphrates River where human civilization was born. In the coming days, we'll be seeing just how far back this history goes, predating not only the city of Haran, but writing and much of recorded human civilization itself, where long before the birth of the Abrahamic religions and the moon god Sin, we had ancient hunter-gatherer tribes who would carve iconography into stone at sites that are now called Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe. And so I'd like to invite you to come along with us to see not only the fairly recent history of this place, but the much more ancient history of the places that lay directly below it. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. Remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and most importantly, I'd like for you to join us as we take this story back as far as we can possibly go.